The air inside the throne room was thick and hot, like something was waiting to explode. And Ray could feel the pressure of dozens of glowing alien eyes on him as he stepped forward his boots, leaving quiet marks on the smooth black floor. And above him on the raised platform sat the alien queen, her face cold, her silver eyes sharp like knives. She did not blink as Ray approached. She simply raised one hand slowly, and when he came closer than expected, she stood and hissed with a voice that echoed through the giant hall, "Touch me again, human, and you will regret it." Ray stopped mid-step, his hands raised out in fear, but calm showing he meant no harm. He had only touched her arm moments earlier when helping her up after a sudden tremor had shaken the building. He did not know it was a sacred rule among her people. No contact with outsiders ever. "I'm sorry," Ray said softly. "I didn't know it was forbidden. I just didn't want you to fall." The alien guards stepped closer, their armor rattling like metal bones. But the queen raised her hand again, this time not to threaten but to stop them, and they froze in place. Ray could see her trying to hide something. Maybe it was pain or maybe pride, he couldn't tell, but she was breathing heavier than before, and her left shoulder was slightly out of place, like she had taken a hit during the tremor. "Why are you here?" she asked, still sharp, but her voice carried more than anger. Now maybe curiosity, maybe confusion. To help, Ray replied. "Simple and true. Earth received your distress. Call our alliance is fragile, but it still exists, and I came as the ambassador to offer aid, not weapons, not politics. Just help." Her silver eyes narrowed, and she tilted her head as if seeing him for the first time beyond the label of human, beyond the uniform he wore. "Help," she repeated slowly, like the word tasted strange on her tongue. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the hallway, and a young alien child ran into the room, chased by collapsing debris. Part of the wall had cracked from the tremor and was now falling. Ray ran before thinking, pushed the child out of the way, and took the hit himself. Stones slammed into his back and knocked the air from his lungs, but he shielded the child fully. Guards rushed to grab him again, but the queen shouted something in her native tongue, and everything froze. Even time, it felt like, and the hall went quiet. Again Ray lay on the ground, his back bruised, his breath short, but he smiled at the child, who looked at him with wide glowing eyes like no alien had ever done before, like trust had just been born. "Lyra." The queen stepped down from her throne, slowly, her robe dragging behind her. She stopped before him and looked down, her voice quieter this time. "Why would you do that for one of mine?" "Because she's a child," Ray said, "and children don't cause wars, they just get caught in them." Queen stared at him longer than needed, then turned and walked back to her throne, her voice carrying across the room. "Let him stay." The guards hesitated, confused, but obeyed. Ray stood slowly, sore but relieved, and glanced once more at the queen, who now sat still again, but her fingers tapped slowly against the armrest, a small sign of thought or something deeper. He was led to guest quarters deeper inside the palace, though guest was a loose term. The door locked from the outside, and the guards never spoke. But Ray didn't mind. He had made progress, and progress was rare out here, especially with a ruler like her. Late that night he heard footsteps, soft and light, someone at the door. It opened without a knock, and the queen stepped inside alone. She did not speak at first, just stood and looked at him in the dark, her face lit only by the soft blue light of the room. He noticed her left arm was still stiff and swollen, and she was hiding it under her. "Robbie, you were hurt," Ray said quietly, not asking, just knowing. She did not deny it. Instead, she sat down across from him and pulled her arm free, the joint dislocated and bruised. "You said you came to help," she whispered. "Prove it." Ray knelt beside her, gently took her arm, and without touching skin, used a portable med tool from Earth. It clicked, softly sprayed healing gel, and guided the bone back into place with a She winced but did not pull away, and when it was done she flexed her fingers slowly. "Impressed you humans and your machines," she muttered, but there was no hate in her tone. "We also have hearts," Ray said softly. "Sometimes those help more than tools." Queen stood again, taller now, and something in her eyes had changed, not warm, but no longer cold either, like a wall had cracked just a little. "You may stay for now," she said, "but do not forget this is not your world, and you are not welcome in all places. Understood?" Ray nodded. She turned to leave, but paused at the door and said one last thing that stayed in his mind long after she was gone. Your kind is dangerous because you feel too much. And then she was gone, and Ray sat there in silence, wondering if he had just begun something that would change not only his fate, but the future of both their worlds. Cracks beneath the crown. The next morning, Ray stood by the tall glass window of his guest chamber, watching the alien city below, breathing in the thick, golden mist that rolled across the streets like silent waves. He could see creatures moving with purpose, soldiers, patrolling priests, chanting traders, haggling, but none of them noticed the human above, watching quietly and wondering how much of this was real and how much was just survival. He had spent the night thinking about the Queen, her words still echoing in his mind. Your kind is dangerous because you feel too much, and it made him question what that really meant. Did emotions scare them, or had they simply forgotten how to feel? A soft knock came at the door, not the sharp fist of a guard, but a gentle tap, and when the door slid open, it was the Queen again, this time without guards, without armor, without her crown. She wore a simple robe made of something that shimmered like starlight, and her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders like silver waterfalls. She looked at Ray, then looked away as if unsure why she had come, then stepped inside and closed the door behind Harry. "Need you," she said, but her voice was low, almost like it hurt to admit it. Ray turned fully to face her, his tone calm. "I am listening." Lyra walked over to the table and pulled something from a hidden pocket, a small device glowing faint blue. She placed it between them, and it projected a swirling image above the table, a hologram of alien DN, a strands breaking apart, collapsing like a dying star. "This is what is happening to my people," she said. "Our blood, our strength, our future. It is breaking from the inside, and our healers cannot stop it. We thought it was a curse. We thought it was war poison, but nothing fits." Ray leaned in, studying the images. He had seen something like this before, a long time ago, in a remote human colony hit by a virus that only targeted emotional regulators in the brain. "What if it's not poison?" he said. "What if it is silence?" She repeated, not understanding. "You said my kind feels too much," Ray explained. "What if your kind has forgotten how to feel for so long that your own bodies are shutting down because of it? Feelings create balance in humans. Sadness, love, anger, they all trigger reactions, chemicals, responses. But if you have none of that, your system may slowly fade." Lyra stared at him like she wanted to laugh but couldn't, because deep down something inside her knew he might be right. "That is absurd," she said quietly, but she did not stop the hologram from spinning. And she did not walk away. Ray stood and walked to the window again, city still moving below him, and he said something that made her chest tighten. "You carry the weight of millions, and you do not even let yourself cry." The Queen looked away, then walked to a corner of the room and sat on a cushion, her shoulders stiff, but her fingers twitching like a memory was rising, something she had buried. "Long ago, when I was a child," she began softly, "my brother fell from the high tower during a moon ritual. I was told not to cry, not to scream. I was told to show strength, because I was born for the crown, and the crown has no tears." Ray listened quietly, his heart heavy, because he had heard that kind of story too many times across too many planets, and he knew what it did to a soul. "Maybe it is time to change the crown," he said. Lyra looked at him, her eyes no longer sharp, but tired, not weak, but worn like a mountain after many storms. "You speak like a leader," she said. "I speak like a human." Ray answered suddenly. An alarm blared through the palace, and the lights shifted from soft gold to flashing red. Guards rushed past the hallway, shouting in alien tongue, and Lyra stood instantly, eyes wide. Something was wrong, something urgent. "Is happening?" Ray asked. The Queen grabbed her communicator, and her voice turned to steel again. "A group of rebels, they have breached the outer wall. Someone betrayed us, and now they come for Ray moved beside her, already alert, his instincts sharp. "You need to move now. Where is your safe exit?" She looked at him, not as a queen, but as a person. And she hesitated before nodding and leading him through a hidden passage behind the wall. The path was narrow and cold, lit by old crystals that buzzed softly. They ran together, no guards, just the two of them, and Ray noticed the way she moved, with purpose but also pain. Her shoulders still not fully healed, yet she said nothing and kept going. They reached a chamber deep underground filled with old tech and sealed doors, and Lyra began activating the escape pod. But Ray saw the screen flicker. And the system reject her commands. It's locked, he said. You've been locked out there. Face turned pale, not from fear, but from betrayal. Only someone close could have done this. Someone trusted. Sound of boots echoed above them, getting closer. They had maybe 2 minutes, and Ray turned to her, his voice calm but firm. There's another way. I saw it on the map during my arrival. The tunnels under the archive chamber, they lead to the old landing pads. We can reach them if we run now. Lyra stared at him, breathing hard, torn between command and survival. And then she nodded and followed him into the darkness. They ran through the tunnel, her robes torn, her hands bleeding from sharp stones. Ray helped her, once lifting her over a fallen beam, and she did not pull away. She allowed it without a word. When they finally reached the landing pad, it was empty, but a small transport sat half buried in dust. Ray rushed to power it on while Lyra scanned the sky for enemy ships. The engine roared to life just as blaster fire lit the air behind them. They jumped inside, and the door sealed, and the ship lifted into the sky, fire and smoke below them as the city burned from within. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her chest rising and falling, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Ray looked at her and said softly, "You are not made of stone." She looked at him, her eyes soft for the first time, and replied, "And you are not just a messenger." They flew into the storm, not knowing where they would land, not knowing what waited ahead. But something had already changed, something small and silent and powerful, something that could never be undone. The forbidden spark. The transport ship flew low through thick clouds, thunder rolling above them like an angry sky watching every move, and lightning flashing close to the hull. But Ray kept his hands steady on the controls while Lyra sat beside him, silent and bruised, her eyes locked forward as if looking at something far beyond the storm. They had escaped the city, but not the danger behind it. Ray could still feel the weight of betrayal burning in her chest, and he could sense she was thinking not just of the rebels, but of everything that brought her to this moment, where a queen now sat in silence next to a human with blood on her hands and no kingdom beneath her feet. "We cannot return to the palace," she said quietly, her voice dry and sharp. "My council will declare me dead, or worse, a traitor for fleeing. They will place another in my seat, and the rebels will rule under new masks. Then we go where they cannot follow." Ray said, "We go to the ruins you mentioned before, the ancient place, the one you said your ancestors left behind." She looked at him, surprised. "How do you know of that?" "You whispered it when the alarms went off," he replied. "Your mind was racing, and I heard you say the word haven. It was not just fear, it was memory." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded yes. "The temple of origin, it lies far beyond the dust valleys. No one goes there anymore, not since the fall of the old ways. But maybe there we will find answers, or at least a reason not to give up." They flew for hours, the world below changing from tall cities to broken landscapes, cracked earth, silent mountains, and strange glowing rivers that pulsed like veins. The sky above them turned deep red, and the air became heavy, as if the planet itself knew what was coming. They landed at night on a wide stone platform carved with ancient symbols worn by time and wind, and ahead stood the ruins, tall and jagged like broken teeth reaching into the stars. The place was quiet, no guards, no power, just silence and cold memories buried in stone. Ray stepped out first, scanning for danger, then helped Lyra down. Though she did not ask for help this time, she accepted it, her pride burned away by everything they had been through. Inside the temple, the air was thick with dust and echoes. Every step they took stirred up memories that had no voice, only presence, and Lyra moved slower here, her hands brushing the walls, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something deeper, a kind of sacred grief. "My mother brought me here once," she said. "I was young and full of questions, but she told me this place was not for answers, it was for truth, and I never understood until now." Followed her deeper into the hall, where a large stone device stood in the center, glowing faintly, still alive after centuries, and surrounded by 6 Carved pillars, each showing different figures, humans and aliens standing together, hands joined, eyes closed, hearts aligned. These are your ancestors, he whispered, and she nodded. They believed in unity. They believed in shared strength. But the old council feared contamination. They erased this history, told us we were pure, and that purity must be protected even from emotion. Ray reached out and touched the device, and it pulsed brighter then. Lyra stepped forward too, and her fingers touched the same spot, and the entire temple began to hum with low energy, as if something ancient had been waiting for them for this exact moment. Of vision exploded around them, not with sound but with light, a memory stored inside the walls, showing a time when humans and her kind worked together, built cities, healed planets. Their bond not only spiritual but biological, a deep connection that allowed shared emotions and even shared pain. You were not meant to be alone, Ray said quietly. Your kind was never meant to silence feeling. You were meant to share it like breath, like light. Lyra fell to her knees, overwhelmed, her eyes wide with truth, and something began to crack inside her, not her mind but her wall, the one she had held for years, for decades. For a lifetime. Ray knelt beside her, placing a hand near hers, not touching but close, and she looked at him through tears. She did not know she still had. He was taught to hate you, she said. I was trained to see humans as threats, unpredictable, wild, emotional. But you saved me more than once, and you did not ask for anything in return. Because feeling is not weakness. Ray said it is what makes survival matter. It is what makes sacrifice real. And in that moment, she reached out and touched his hand. Their skin met, not as enemies, not as ruler and guest, but as two souls drawn together by something older than war, older than rule, older than memory. The temple responded. A wave of light burst outward from the device and through the walls and into the sky, and far across the stars, a signal was sent, not of data or command but of connection, pure and powerful. Lyra gasped as a warmth filled her chest, a surge of energy that did not burn but healed, and Ray felt it too, his mind filled with strange images, her memories, her fears, her dreams. They were being shared, not forced, just offered. Then the light faded and the silence returned, but they both knew everything had changed. The bond was real, and it had awakened something in the blood of her people, something ancient, something that could not be ignored. Suddenly their communicator lit up, a message from the palace, emergency signal from the queen herself. The system read, but Lyra was sitting right here. They know, she whispered. They saw the signal. They think I am using Forbidden's power. They will come here to destroy it, and us. Then we show them the truth. Ray said, we make them see what we saw. No, she said, standing slowly, eyes burning with new fire. We do not show them, we make them feel it. She turned toward the temple door, her steps stronger, her presence deeper. She was still queen, but now something more, and as Ray followed, he knew the battle ahead would be harder than any they had faced. But the war was no longer about territory or pride. It was about remembering what had been lost. The spark had returned, and it could no longer be hidden. Rebellion in the court. The air around them was thick with tension as Lyra and Ray walked through the ancient halls of the temple, now feeling like something more than just stone and dust. They moved with purpose, each step carrying them closer to a destiny they didn't fully understand yet, but one that was now tied together, their fates linked by something neither could ignore. They emerged from the depths of the ruins into the open night sky, and the winds howled through the valley as if the world itself was mourning what had been lost and what was about to begin. Ray looked up at the stars that filled the sky above the temple. He had never seen a night so clear, so raw, the vastness of the universe stretching out before him. But the weight of the moment was heavier than the stars themselves. He turned to Lyra, who now stood tall with fire in her eyes. We have to make them listen, she said, her voice steady yet laced with the pain of the decision she had already made. We will, Ray replied, but his voice carried more than just confidence. It carried something deeper, something that came from within his own soul. The desire to see justice, but also to see healing for a race long divided by pride and silence. They stepped back into the transport ship, their only way out of this forsaken place, and Lyra didn't hesitate. She immediately activated the controls. And the ship rose into the night sky, leaving behind the only place that might have held the answers they sought. As the ship moved through the atmosphere, Lyra remained silent, staring out the window as the alien world below grew smaller and smaller, until only the stars and the blackness of space remained. She could feel the eyes of her people watching her every move, judging her decisions. But this time, it didn't matter. This time she was ready to face them head-on. Ray sat quietly next to her, his mind racing with what lay ahead. But there was no fear, only a strange calmness, as if everything had led to this moment, a moment where everything would change. The palace came into view like a looming fortress in the distance, its walls towering above the city, the spires gleaming in the pale moonlight. It was a place of power and control, but as they flew closer, Ray could feel the shift in the air. The rebellion had already begun. The whispers of change had already started to spread. When they landed, the courtyard was eerily quiet. Only a few guards stood at attention, but there was no sign of the Queen's usual court. No one in the hallways, and the palace seemed almost abandoned. They moved quickly through the palace halls, avoiding the main corridors as Lyra led Ray deeper into the heart of the palace, the place where the council chambers stood, the room where her fate would be decided. But this time it was different. She wasn't the queen who would obey. She was the queen who would fight for her people. They reached the chamber doors, and Lyra stopped for a moment, her hand resting on the cold metal. She turned to Ray, her eyes full of determination. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "you stay by my side." Ray nodded. There was no need for words between them. Now they had come this far, and there was no turning back. The doors opened, and they entered the council chamber, but it was not what they expected. The room was filled with tension. As the council members sat in a circle around a large table, their eyes fixed on Lyra and Ray. "You dare return here?" One of the council members said, his voice filled with contempt. "After abandoning your throne and running away like a coward." "I am not a coward," Lyra replied, her voice cold but steady. "I was not running from my people. I was running for them. I was trying to save them." The council members exchanged looks, their eyes full of doubt and suspicion. But Lyra didn't back down. She stood taller than ever before, the power in her voice undeniable. "You speak of saving them," another council member said. "But how can you save them when you have betrayed our ways, our traditions? You have broken the most sacred laws of our people." Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice rising as she spoke the words she had been holding inside for so long. "I broke those laws because they no longer serve us," she said. "We have lived in silence for too long. We have denied our emotions, hidden our truth, and look where it has brought us. Our people are dying from the inside out because we have forgotten how to feel, how to connect." There was a long silence in the room as the council members listened. But they were not ready to accept what Lyra was saying, their faces twisted in anger and confusion. "This is madness," one of them said. "You want to destroy everything we have built for centuries. You want to turn our people into nothing but weak, emotional beings." "Emotions are not weakness," Lyra said, her voice firm. "They are our strength. They are what make us human. They are what make us alive." And in that moment, something shifted in the room, something that had been buried for centuries began to rise up. The council members looked at each other, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to fight this truth that Lyra had brought to them. Ray watched the exchange quietly. He had seen this before on Earth, when leaders refused to change, when they held on to their old ways because they feared what might happen if they embraced something new. But he knew Lyra was right. He knew her people needed this change. Suddenly a loud crash echoed through the chamber as the door burst open and a group of rebels stormed inside, their faces filled with fury and hatred. "You have betrayed us, Lyra," one of them shouted. "You are no better than the enemies you claim to fight against." Lyra turned to face them, her eyes filled with resolve. "I have not betrayed you," she said. "I have betrayed nothing but lies that have kept us in the dark for too long." The rebels advanced, but Lyra didn't back down. She stood tall, ready to face whatever was coming next, and Ray stood beside her, ready to fight for the future they were both trying to build. And as the council members watched, unsure of what to do, the battle began, not just for power, but for the soul of an entire species. Lyra raised her hand, and with one word, she commanded the rebels to stop. Enough. Her voice rang out like a thunderclap, and for the first time in years, her people stopped and listened. Enough, she repeated. This ends now. We fight for our future, not our past. The council sat in stunned silence as Lyra's words hung in the air, and Ray could see the change in her people. Their walls were coming down, and the rebellion was no longer about hatred, it was about hope, and together, they would rebuild the bond that changed everything. The rebellion had quieted, but the weight of the moment still hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Lyra stood at the front of the council hall, her back straight, eyes blazing with something that hadn't been there before: belief in herself, in her people, in what was to come. Ray stood beside her, watching as the council members slowly, hesitantly, rose to their feet. The rebels were no longer shouting, they were listening. They weren't ready to accept everything Lyra had said, but they were beginning to understand. The Queen looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had once seen her only as a symbol of power. She was no longer just a queen. She was something new, something her people had not seen in generations. And it wasn't just the rebellion she had to overcome, it was the centuries of silence and fear that had ruled her people's hearts. Enough blood has been spilled, she said, her voice steady, though it carried a power that Ray had never heard before. Enough lies have kept us apart. We've allowed fear to drive us for too long. Fear of weakness, fear of emotion, fear of change. But that ends today. We will not survive if we continue down this path. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but this time they did not argue. They did not call for her punishment. They saw it too, the same truth that Lyra had realized, that without change, their people would continue to fade. It wasn't just about survival, it was about growth. It was about becoming something better. One of the council members, an older man with graying hair and a deep scar across his face, stepped forward. His voice was rough, but there was a hint of respect in it. You speak of change, Lyra, but change is not easy, and it is not without cost, he said. You want us to embrace emotions, to share our pain, to feel again. But what if we cannot? What if it is too late for us? Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. It is never too late, she said softly. We can heal, and we can rebuild, but only if we do it together. Only if we let go of the old ways and open our hearts to what is possible. You, of all people, should know that better than anyone. The man said nothing, but Ray could see the truth sinking into him. The walls were starting to crumble, not just in Lyra, but in the council as well. For the first time, the Queen was not just the ruler of a people. She was one with them, standing beside them as they faced the darkness and the unknown together. Ray turned to Lyra, his gaze softening. She had changed, hadn't she? Her eyes weren't as cold now. Her movements weren't as rigid. She had let go of the mask of perfection, the wall she'd built around herself, and in doing so, she had begun to truly lead. She turned to him, as if sensing his thoughts, and smiled. I never thought I would be here, Ray, she said, her voice quieter now, full of vulnerability. I never thought I would be the one to face this kind of truth. But you made me see it. You made me understand that power is not in controlling others. It is in connecting with them, feeling with them. Ray smiled back, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. You've always had it in you, Lyra, he said gently. You just had to find it. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken, something that wasn't just about survival or rebellion. It was about connection, the bond they had formed through shared struggle, shared truth, and shared emotion. Suddenly, the doors to the chamber burst open again, but this time, there was no shouting. There was no storm of anger or betrayal. Instead, a soft voice called out, "The council has spoken." Lyra turned to see one of the rebel leaders, a woman with wild dark eyes stepping forward. Her face was no longer twisted in hatred. There was no fire in her gaze now, only a quiet understanding. "We were wrong," the rebel leader said, her voice low but firm. "You were right, Lyra. We've been fighting the wrong battle. We've been fighting for control when we should have been fighting for each other." The room fell silent as Lyra looked at the woman. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and Ray could see the shift in the room. The rebellion wasn't about violence anymore. It was about healing, about accepting the pain and moving forward. Together, Lyra stepped forward, her voice full of the wisdom she had gained. "We've all been wrong," she said. "We've all let fear guide us. But now, we have the chance to change. We have the chance to become something more. Not just for us, but for the future of all our people." The rebel leader nodded and stepped aside, allowing the other rebels to enter the room. They were no longer armed with weapons, but with open hearts. They came forward slowly, hesitantly, but there was no fear in their eyes anymore. There was only hope. Ray watched as the rebels and the council members came together, no longer separated by their differences, but united by a common goal: to rebuild, to grow, and to face the future together as one people. Lyra turned to Ray, her face soft, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You were right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've shown me that everything we've been fighting for has been worth it." Ray reached out and took her hand, his heart full as he gazed into her eyes. It wasn't just the bond between them that had changed everything. It was the bond between her people, between the rebels and the council, between humans and aliens. It was a new beginning. The Queen, once bound by tradition and fear, was now free. And her people, once divided by silence and pride, were now united by the one thing that made them strong: emotion, connection, and the willingness to change. Together, they had broken the old ways and built something new. And this time it would last.